The second one is Psalm 22. It basically describes Jesus Christ's crucifixion experience 200 years before crucifixion is even invented. This one is like one of my faves. It's really legit. The psalm starts off saying, my God, why have you forsaken me?" which is exactly what Jesus says on the cross later. And something really cool about Psalm 22 and also Isaiah 53 later, I'm going to talk about that later. I encourage you to read that to your non-believer friends and say, who's this talking about? You know? Who is this really talking about? And they'll probably go, well, that's obviously talking about Jesus. And then you can go, that's interesting because this was written hundreds of years before he was born. Oh, very effective.
Hello, this is K. Sevenger, and that was a perfect example of a Christian cherry-picking and not actually knowing anything about their own holy book. And now for something completely different. And if that doesn't clear up why this is a bad argument, I'll go into further detail.
The second one is Psalm 22. It basically describes Jesus Christ's crucifixion experience 200 years before crucifixion is even invented.
Wow, there are so many problems with this. This is bordering upon lying, especially ever since I've already corrected you. For one, Psalm 22 is not a description of Jesus' crucifixion. It's the description of a guy being depressed because he's getting the crap beaten out of him by a group of men, not, oh, I'm the Son of God dying for all sins. And not to mention, it doesn't describe crucifixion. Your holy book describes his hands being pierced. Now, there's more to a crucifixion than just hands being pierced. You know, there's like 2 planks of wood and a specific thing that the thing is being pierced into. I mean, for instance, if I stab someone in the hand, I didn't crucify them. If I get them on a cross and stab it and they're attached to the cross, then you could say that I crucified them. Not to mention that there's something called a biblical error here, because what the Hebrew, you know how the Hebrews wrote this stuff down? What the Hebrew actually says and what your Bible says is different, because your Bible is wrong, in error, mistranslated. That is correct. The entirety of your argument is based upon a biblical error in your attempt to prove the validity of the Bible. Funds. Now let's look at the directly translated Hebrew text and see what it actually says. For dogs have encompassed me, a company of evildoers have enclosed me. Like a lion, they are at my hands and my feet. So the Hebrew does not mention anything about piercing. What they mention are lions. Now, if there's a part of the Bible where Jesus gets mauled by a lion, please point it to me. And also, not to mention the ideas of retcon, special pleading, and confirmation bias are coming to mind, because essentially what you're doing is that you're just looking through the Old Testament, looking for anything that resembles Jesus, full confirmation bias, and in fact there's a lot of the Psalms, most of the Psalms, in fact all the Psalms don't mention Jesus. And there's also the fact that Psalms were never meant to be prolific. They were poems written for special occasions by King David, supposedly. I mean, this is, the prayer of the suffering man. And that's all it is. It was never meant to be prolific. But you're essentially just retconning the Bible, willing to just do any twist and turn to it that you can just to try to make your case, because you don't seem to present any actual evidence. This is a prayer about a guy being beat up, and with a lot of animal imagery, and that's all.
This one is like one of my faves. It's really legit.
Legit in that it doesn't actually describe Jesus' crucifixion, and your smidget of a case is based completely on biblical error. The psalm starts off saying, my God, why have you forsaken me?" which is exactly what Jesus says on the cross later. Okay, so let me get this straight. In the Jewish tradition, they're taught certain prayers, and one of those prayers is, the prayer of the suffering man, which they're supposed to recite on certain occasions. Like, for instance, if they're suffering, if they're happy. They're kind of like Hallmark cards. There's one for every occasion. And Jesus, supposedly a Jew, while suffering, recites the prayer that he was taught specifically for occasions when they're suffering. And this is some kind of amazing revelation. How? How about this? He was a Jew. He was taught the prayer. He was taught the specific prayer of what to say when you're suffering. He was suffering. He said the prayer.
And something really cool about Psalm 22 and also Isaiah 53 later. I'm going to talk about that later.
Yes, you are.
Halo? Salut? Sunt eu un haiduk?
I encourage you to read that to your non-believer friends and say, who's this talking about? You know? Who is this really talking about? And they'll probably go, well, that's obviously talking about Jesus. And
Actually, we'll understand what you're trying to hint at, and we'll go, LOL, I know your holy book better than you. Ha ha! Or something possibly to that effect. I mean, really, have you read a Bible? Have you done any research into the Bible? Please! Another reason that I've gone away from Christianity and I've gone away from religion in general is that the most religious seem to not actually know anything about their Bibles. LOL. So essentially your argument was based upon retconning the Bible, special pleading, confirmation bias, all of this built upon a mistranslated portion of your holy book. This is a case of injury and, did anything odd happen during the video?